All right, so I'm here with Amy Phillips, engineering manager on the delivery group. So we're having a chat about how we at GitLab deliver the GitLab application itself, and to which extent we use our own release features on that life cycle. Amy, I'm sorry I missed your request to look at the agenda, but I hope you were able to take a look before.
I did, yes. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll be taking a few notes as we go through, but can you maybe start by giving me an overview of the release process at GitLab today?
Yeah, of course. So the way we are deploying GitLab.com. We're working on a continuous delivery process. So we try and deploy GitLab.com as frequently as we can. The moment that generally is around 3 or 4 times a day is the current schedule. And what we have is set up is we have scheduled branches that get created. And they are created times that suit release managers' working hours, basically. And what we have set up is we will cut a branch from master. So that's an auto deploy branch that gets created. And that will build, head into staging. It's an auto deploy onto our staging environment. If the tests and the pipeline all succeed, we auto deploy to Canary. So Canary is a subset of production, shares database, but has its own service. And if the deployment to the Canary environment is successful, we leave it sitting on Canary for an hour. People within GitLab are generally using Canary. Some external users have also opted in to use Canary. So we get like a reasonable amount of traffic. And if everything's looking healthy, then on Canary, we can choose to do a manual promotion to production. Now we coordinate all of these things. At the moment, we're running a hybrid environment. So we're using VMs as well as Kubernetes. And we're coordinating all of our deployments using the Bridge Jobs feature that just came out a couple of milestones ago. So I can, would it be helpful for me to show you that Bridge Job?
Yeah, I think so.
So we run all of our things via ChatOps pretty much. So the announcements channel is our main source of keeping track of what's happening. Let me just take back to the beginning of the day. So for me, my sort of the as release manager in EMEA time zones, early in the morning, the first package starts getting created. We can ignore this one, but what happens here is we go into staging. We had staging failure here, and we pass through to Canary, so we can see the package numbers. So every time we pass through an environment, it just posts out here with our package, and so we can see those. But what we're actually doing the coordination with is with coordinated pipelines. So I'll show you this one. So what we have here is we are tagging on an auto deploy schedule. That will go for build. We have a metrics job. And then we start off. And so they all auto go staging and Canary. And then we have our baking time automated. And then at this point, this would be our manual job to kick things off into production. And then we finish up with the tracking.
That manual job, what is the interface for you to approve it? Do you do it via ChatOps as well?
We do it here. So we come in here and hit the play button here.
All right.
And what's happening alongside, so one of the reasons some of our things are different is all of every milestone, every release we track, we auto-generate a release issue. And this is what the release managers use throughout the whole month. So we have in here, we have steps for like normal things around creating the monthly release. But we also have in if there are any special steps that need to happen that month. So for example, we will add in additional steps that we need to run around Family and Friends Day, for example, like we go into a soft production changelog on Family and Friends Day, so we'll pause the deployments for those times. So we add in the steps so the release managers can just follow. Yeah. But what we also have at the bottom is every time we promote to production, we post a comment here and we record who did the promotion and which package they promoted. And we have a couple of extra things that we do that we check before we do a promotion. We're checking there are no active incidents running on production. We're checking there are no active change requests of severity 1 or 2. And we check the health status as well. So these things will also, if any of these fail, the promotion to production will fail and it will be logged on here. We probably have some actually.
Right. One quick question. What's the change request in this context?
So if there's a change that needs to happen for, I think we have one open actually. If we want to make a change to production or any environment and it's not automated, so this will be in the handbook, we open a change request. And this allows us to record through the process that we're following. So this is the process.
Right.
I'll pop it onto the validation bit because it's sort of related. So this allows us to sort of detail out the process we'll follow and any approvals that are needed. So it's just another issue and it gets marked up with a change severity, basically. A criticality. So they have different approval levels around these things. So we're checking anything that's a criticality 1 or 2. Our deployment process assumes is risky enough that we wouldn't want to automatically deploy to production. So there could be a database change happening or something significant going on with the underlying infrastructure. So we wouldn't just automatically deploy. So what we have in those cases is, here we go. So last week, when I triggered the deployment, the production checks failed. So this is, I'll show you in a sec, but this is one of the first steps of the production promotion pipeline. And it failed because, let me show you this. So this change request was in progress. And this was updating a index on the database. So because of that failure, so in this case, this deployment didn't go through. But what we do have the option of is we have overrides. So on this one, we can see here, separate, I put this one through ChatOps. We have an override command that we can add on an override flag. And then what we do there is we add on a reason for why we're overriding. All the details are here. And then the SRE who's on call also adds a comment here to approve this. So a release manager can't just override a production check and then go ahead and do a deployment. So this is kind of the additional compliance piece that we track around what is being deployed to production and who's doing those deploys.
Right, that makes sense. There's more accountability.
Yes. So that is the additional checks. I'll just show you. So the deployment is in progress right now. So let's take a look. So this is what the production pipeline looks like. So we have various checks that we do here. We warm up the environment. This is where we check whether we're in a change lock. So say if we try on Friday to just push a deployment out, it will fail at this stage. It also applies over the weekend. So we have a change lock that runs between Friday evening and Monday morning so that we can't automatically push over the weekends as well. Just we don't have many SREs available if needed. We have a prepare job, and the prepare job is generally checking for those production check. So is the production environment healthy? Are the change requests in action? Are there other deploys that are still going on? So we don't want to deploy over each other. It also will fail if the last deployment didn't pass successfully for whatever reason. So this will have an auto fail. And then we add in tracking. So this is where we report on the issue. And then we can see here the pipeline steps. Excellent, failure. So we do assets and the first round of migrations. And then we do GitLab, prefect, the production fleet, and then we run post-deployment migrations before we run all of our finished jobs.
Right.
So let me just take a quick look at this failure. So generally what we try and okay, I mean, I'll come back to that one. That one may be slightly more involved. What we're generally trying to do is have as much stuff as we can automatically passing through. So we have quite a lot of additional tooling and steps and things reporting out into the Slack channels to make it as automated as possible. We're ideally trying to get to continuous deployment and just have the whole flow go through and just have it so that if something goes wrong or if something's unexpected, the process can halt, ideally with rollback, and just alert the release managers. So that's kind of what we're working towards at the moment.
And right now you're mostly automated for the GitLab.com deployments. The only thing you do is the promote, right?
That's correct. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And then the bit that's a bit more complicated is if we have an incident. So if the pipeline fails for, like, say, if the tests fail, or if as we're deploying we see some issue, then it gets a bit more hands-on, because what we'll need to do, because it's packaged software, what we need to do then is like pause, get the environment back into a good state, identify the failure, get a fix MR, and then manage that through back to the environment. So it's a little bit more hands-on at that point, which is where we're kind of trying to move. We have rollbacks. We have a rollback pipeline. It's not fully automated yet. There's a few uncertainties around it that we want to kind of iron out before we just make it an auto rollback. But yeah, handling a failure means there's a lot more coordination involved.
Right. And then, so looking at the release project, I could see that if you go to the environments page, it says the environments are created via API, right?
Yes.
And I understand that's because you're not working from within the actual GitLab repository. You're an external repository, and that more or less mimics how lots of our customers need to work. Can you talk a little bit to the limitations of having to work on a separate repository? I assume because of compliance and permissions, right? Like me as a developer, I just can't release GitLab by myself, right? So we need to
get right.
Repository.
Yeah.
And how did you set that up, and how is that experience?
Yeah, so it's very much set up like this in this way for permissions, like you say. This gives a good way of controlling like who has access to be able to deploy all the things. It also gives us a bit of a secondary buffer, which is we operate GitLab using GitLab. And so if GitLab.com goes down, we want to make sure that we actually are still able to deploy a fix and use our tooling. So having it as a separate ops instance gives us that separation. So it'd be incredibly unlikely they would both be down. They are different instances. So we're using like CE as well as EE. So we get to sort of see the different ones. They update on different cadences. We're using the like nightly build. So gives us a little bit more protection to guarantee we'll still have our tooling. But in terms of how they are, well, one of the limitations we see, the biggest one I think we have really is developers don't have visibility of things. So we hear, quite a common one we hear is post-deployment migrations failing. And unfortunately, developers don't have the logs that go with those jobs because they sit inside the ops instance. So we have a few problems like that where just general visibility is definitely not ideal because we're operating from within a separate instance.
Right. Yeah, I hadn't considered the fact that indeed it makes sense for it to be a separate instance for reliability reasons. But I'm not sure if other customers would need that as well.
I think
Right.
that's probably reasonably unusual. We have a few things that are a little bit unusual for us. We rely very heavily on mirroring. So what we'll tend to do is mirror, because again, one thing that's unique, I think, to GitLab is the fact that we also have our security repositories, and we mirror all our code over to security so that we can do security fixes. So that's very uniquely GitLab. So I think this one's fairly unique to us. I think permissions and having a good way of actually, it's almost less, I suppose, the who can access things and more the audit of who did access it and what actions did they take is probably is the thing that we rely on quite heavily, which say we do through the release issue.
Right. So that way you only need to audit the release instance, the ops instance.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So when we do audit, we sort of check on who has access to things in ops and in these projects, and then we can map that against the actions that we can see being taken that have been logged somewhere.
Right. And it's really interesting how not only all of the complex pipelines but also the chat ops that I assume your team built on top of it. Usually, how do you work to try and dog food these improvements into the actual GitLab product?
Yeah, so what we try and do is there are times where there are features that already exist. Often we'll like try and switch things over like piece by piece. Like if something comes up in the API, for example, we rely very heavily on the API. And that's really just because our processes are reasonably complicated. So we tend to string together actions, but also as we're trying to move towards continuous deployment, in an ideal world, we'll actually just have an automated script that just runs through all of these steps. So we try and have everything as kind of an automated step. So yeah, what we'll typically do is if we see a way of switching over, so say we just recently moved over to bridge jobs. And what we used to do before was have kind of waits in our pipeline. So we'd wait 40 minutes for this downstream pipeline to hopefully pass. If it didn't, we'd take action, whereas we just recently refactored the pipeline so we could have bridge jobs. So we often do refactoring of our tooling to try and take advantage of GitLab features. Or in more rare cases, if there's something bigger where we are finding we're kind of having to maintain release code that we don't like, doesn't really make sense, we'll try and get it into the product. So changelogs are the good example of that one, where building that into the API meant we could delete a load of our custom coding, but also it puts a feature back in. So it's a little bit unusual we do it that way. It's more normal that we'll try and adopt or enhance the features that are already existing.
Right. And in terms of promoting the releases, right? You said you go directly to the pipeline page. Do you see that as the ideal place for your team, for your workflow, or there is another place in the UI that would be more interesting to take this action to approve or deny?
Yeah, so it works quite well for us. So the reason we tend to come in this way, so actually we have one here that's happened. So when baking time completes, so baking time is just an arbitrary time. For us, it's an hour at the moment. We have Canary running. And then what happens at the end of the hour is release tools alerts the release manager. So this was quite a big enhancement for us recently because it reduces waiting. So release managers don't have to be keeping an eye on the clock. Right. They just get a ping. And then what happens here is we get a kind of report of are things healthy, are things in action? And if they are passing, we provide a link straight into the pipeline and we can promote from there. So for us, it works well just because of the fact that the information is coming to us at the time we need to take an action. And we get this kind of like short summary of like, here's all the stuff, here's what you need to do. So that we find that quite an efficient way of working. It could be something in the product. One thing that we don't have great visibility on is what's inside that package. So we've talked a little bit before about should we be doing something else where actually like maybe this spits out like an issue or something like that, where actually you get more of a report of like, here's what's happened, here's the package, here's what's in the package, as well as these checks. And that could also be a possibility for us.
Right. But do you mean what's in the package in terms of a change log of all the commits and changes that were part of that release?
Yeah, like all the commits and changes. So one of the reasons why we don't use it too much at the point of deployment, because we sort of treat it like it's a package and ready to go. But if as we're deploying this, we see issues, it's a little bit of work for us to actually go back and pull out like, okay, what exactly is inside this package? Did we change something on this database table, for example, that might be contributing to this problem? So it does delay us a little bit on debugging, just because we don't have any links right here to the full list of commits.
Right. So I'm not entirely familiar with the actual release product yet, but would a release with a changelog remediate that, or that's not a good solution for the delivery team?
So unfortunately with the changelog, so the changelogs come with the releases, but they don't get generated until the point where we create the release. So they're kind of like a lagging piece of information. So yes, they would have it, but for the GitLab.com stuff, they don't have it at this point.
Right. So for the monthly releases, is the release created before the deployment is approved or after?
It's after. So all changes go to GitLab.com first. So we try and deploy as frequently as we can throughout like every day, but throughout the month. And then what will happen before the 22nd is release managers will select a stable package. So it's usually something that's been on GitLab.com for some hours, at least 4 or 5 hours. We'll say, okay, it's fully deployed. There have been no problems reported so far. Things are performing well. We will package that point. So it's a lagging action, and that's really just because it's so much harder to get fixes into a package. So we try and sort of test things out as much as possible.
Got it. Let me see if I have a question here. Yeah, that was a lot. I think you answered all of my questions. Is there anything I can help you with, like from the release side, like any questions you have?
So I suppose a couple of things which would be quite useful. So one of the things that we don't have an easy way to do is overriding on environments. There's 2 cases where we override environment locks. One is fine, and it's a little bit more casual. Like if we don't want everything to auto deploy to Canary or whatever, for whatever reason, we have a chatops command to lock and unlock the environment, and that's totally fine. But the more difficult ones is if we actually need to override the actual production change logs, which we do sometimes. So if we have an incident, we'll need to override them. That would be super helpful to have a way of unlocking an environment, but also having it's the approval piece. So if we have a hard production change lock in place, we actually need like someone at like VP level to approve us on that. And at the moment, we don't really have a good way of capturing that and having that kind of baked into who does the override.
Right. These overrides today, like you can create them on a chatops command, but once it goes into GitLab, is it part of the YAML for the environment? Like where is this registered?
Yeah, so we're using CI variables for pretty much all of these things. So pretty much all of our chatops commands actually are changing the value of CI variables.
Right. So you change the variable of the lock from true to false, and then right. So what you mean is that you need VP approval for changing a production lock on production, but right now there's no audit for that.
Exactly. So what we, and actually it's pretty much the same when we override a regular deployment. So what we have a pretty clunky process where we ask in Slack, you know, check like, hey, is it going to be okay to override this? People say, sure, yeah, we do the override, and then they have to go and add a comment on the issue. So that's the, you know, it's a little bit of working around, like having something like a job or a way of actually like someone being able to just press a button, but it being logged as like the approval of who did that action would be incredibly helpful.
That's super interesting because I remember when I pinged you a while back on that deployment approval issue that we're going to pick up soon in the future. And one thing I had in the back of my mind is that that kind of approval UI doesn't necessarily have to be limited to approving or rejecting a deploy, because there are many different actions that need to be approved in this context, right? This one being one of them. So it would be super interesting for it to be a generic approval or rejection module where for any specific action, you can make a pop-up that, yes, approve this, and then only the right person with the right permission can approve it, and it generates an audit log.
Yeah, that would be super helpful. Yeah. And I think for us, I'm not sure about other users, but certainly for us, I think it's much more around recording the like who was involved and what approval was given versus the like you absolutely can't press this button type of thing. So it's just having that audit trail is more of our requirement.
Right. More important, the actual audit trail rather than the permission.
I think so, yeah.
Cool. All right, we are almost at time. So if you don't have anything else, I think we are good. Thank you so much for taking the time for this. It was super helpful.
Thank
Working
you.
with the team. And yeah, I'll definitely be in touch for next
Brilliant.
step.
That's great. Thank you so much. Lovely to chat to you.
Day.
You too. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.